The indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, I mean, it's not just another news story. This feels like an earthquake in American politics, doesn't it?
It really does. We've watched this really high-stakes feud play out for years, and now, boom, federal felony charges filed September 2025.
Right. And the core question, I think, for everyone listening, especially our knowledgeable learners here at KaiZen, is this. Is this real accountability, for things he did wrong? Or is it just politics, a political hit job, plain and simple?
Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
That's exactly what we need to figure out. It's where, the political talk hits the legal reality. We've gathered a ton of material, DOJ Inspector General reports detailing Comey's actions back in 2016, news coverage from AP, The Guardian on the recent indictment, everything.
And our mission today is to unpack it all, give you that clarity so you can see past the spin, because you really need the history to understand what's happening now.
Exactly.
So we're diving straight in. Ask yourself right now, Comey, villain, victim. Keep that question in mind as we go.
Okay, let's start with the shockwave. September 2025. James Comey indicted. 2 felony counts.
Then these aren't minor charges, right? We're talking serious felony.
Absolutely not minor. These are significant criminal charges. It's not just a reprimand.
So what exactly are the charges? The reports say it's about lying, misleading lawmakers about the Russia investigation.
That's the core of it. It centers on his testimony back in 2020. Specifically, did he lie about authorizing leaks, leaking internal FBI info to the media, particularly around the start of the Russia probe?
Because he always maintained he didn't authorize leaks, didn't he?
He did. He claimed he never told anyone at the FBI to leak. But prosecutors are now saying they have evidence, maybe emails, maybe testimony from others, proving the claim was false. That's the alleged lying to Congress and obstruction piece.
Okay, so right away you see the lines being drawn, the political battlefield is set. You have one side seeing this as long overdue accountability.
That's the offense case. Attorney General Pam Bondi, her statement really set that tone. She said, flat out, no one is above the law.
Framing it as proof, the Justice Department is serious about accountability for abuse of power.
Exactly. For a lot of people, this confirms their view that officials involved in politically charged cases, especially around elections, have to be held to the absolute highest standard when they testify.
And, of course, former President Trump jumped right on that.
Instantly. Went straight to social media, called Comey a dirty cop, a destroyer of lives, celebrated it as justice in America.
Which really feeds that narrative, doesn't it? The idea of the deep state, officials acting above the law, finally getting caught, purging the system.
It plays right into it. But then you have the immediate counterargument, the defense case, that this is pure political targeting. And the circumstances around the indictment itself make that argument powerful.
The ACLU, for example, came out really strong.
They did, called it a grotesque abuse of presidential power. They weren't just criticizing the charge itself. They basically said the administration corrupted the justice system to carry out a vendetta.
A direct challenge to the DOJ's impartiality.
And that brings us to the alleged mechanism of the retribution. This is critical. Sources pointed out that the White House had recently pushed out the previous top prosecutor in that district.
And installed Pam Bondi,
Right.
who used to be Trump's personal lawyer, right before the charges against Comey dropped.
Precisely. That timing, that specific personnel change, well, it adds a lot of fuel to the claims of political interference. You can see why people would be suspicious.
Comey himself hit that point hard on Instagram, denied the charges, said something like, "My family and I have known for years that there are costs to standing up to Donald Trump."
Yeah, framing it as political martyrdom, the price for defying Trump.
So this current fight, it's really the climax of this incredibly bitter feud that started almost the minute Trump won in 2016.
You really have to go back there to understand the intensity now. It didn't just come out of nowhere.
Let's talk about that backstory, because Comey's actions later, the ones that got him labeled a rogue agent, they make more sense, or at least are put in context, by those early interactions.
Right. Remember, Comey briefed Trump before the inauguration about the Steele dossier, the really salacious, unverified stuff. That alone set a weird tone.
And then came the loyalty requests.
Yeah. Comey documented it all. Trump asking for personal loyalty, asking him to drop the investigation into Michael Flynn, his national security advisor.
And Trump kept asking Comey to publicly say that he, Trump, wasn't personally under investigation.
Which leads to this really crucial difference in how Comey operated. He wrote detailed memos about all 9 of his one-on-one talks with Trump.
Which he absolutely did not do with President Obama. She only documented 2 in-person meetings there, never phone calls. That's a huge shift.
A massive, deliberate shift. And here's where you see the beginnings of what you called the Comey doctrine of solo action. His reason. He felt the requests were so unusual, so politically loaded, loyalty pledges, dropping investigations, that he had to create a paper trail, an unclassified one.
To protect himself, to protect the FBI.
Both, probably. He testified that he wrote the memo about the Flynn conversation immediately after leaving the meeting, like in the FBI car outside Trump Tower.
Wow.
Yeah. It shows he was already operating on the assumption that the political environment was potentially compromised, even at the very top. Documenting everything was his way to try and shield the Bureau and himself from pressure. Those memos are now central to his defense against the retribution claims. He was recording potential interference in real time.
Okay, so that sets the stage for the feud. But to really get why Comey became such a target, why he was fired, why he's now indicted, we have to look at 2016, specifically his handling of the Hillary Clinton email investigation, the mid-year exam.
Right, because the DOJ Inspector General reports on that investigation revealed some serious policy failures.
Yeah.
These damaged the FBI's credibility before Trump even took office.
And this is where that Comey doctrine really kicks into high gear, isn't it? Starting with that July 5th, 2016 press conference.
Exactly. By May 2016, Comey and his team knew they weren't going to recommend prosecuting Clinton.
Why not? This is a key point, legally.
It boiled down to criminal intent. The law they were looking at, Section 793(3)(I), requires showing someone acted willfully or with gross negligence that was almost willful. Basically, did they knowingly put classified info where it shouldn't be?
And the FBI couldn't prove that.
They concluded they didn't have enough evidence to show that state of mind. They believed no reasonable prosecutor would bring the case. So legally, the decision was clear. No charges.
Okay, so no charges. But Comey didn't just let the DOJ announce that quietly. He decided to make his own statement.
And here's the solo action part. He deliberately didn't tell Attorney General Loretta Lynch or Deputy AG Sally Yates his plan beforehand.
Why not?
He told the OIG later he was afraid they'd tell him not to do it because it broke all the norms about commenting publicly, especially so close to an election. He only told them that morning, July 5th, after the press was already called.
He went rogue, essentially, bypassed his bosses, and his justification was tied to that tarmac meeting.
The Lynch-Tarmac incident, yeah. That meeting between A.G. Lynch and Bill Clinton on the tarmac in Phoenix. Comey said that's what tipped the scales for him.
Even though they said they just talked about grandkids and golf.
Right. But Comey felt it created this corrosive doubt about the investigation's integrity. Especially since Lynch was a Democratic appointee, he thought the public wouldn't trust the DOJ's decision. The OIG later did call Lynch's failure to end that meeting an error in judgment, by the way.
So Comey decided the only way to look credible was to cut the DOJ out and announce it himself.
Pretty much. But then there's the language he used in that announcement. That caused a whole separate firestorm.
The grossly negligent versus extremely careless thing.
Exactly. The initial draft used the phrase grossly negligent to describe Clinton's handling of emails. That phrase is close to the legal standard in the statute.
They changed it.
They changed it to extremely careless. Comey said his team advised the change because grossly negligent sounded too much like the criminal standard they had decided not to pursue. Extremely careless let him criticize her strongly without implying criminality.
So it was a legalistic distinction, trying to be precise.
Legally precise, yes, but politically. It looked like he was softening the blow, maybe protecting her. It just created more suspicion, even though he was trying to be transparent and legally accurate.
That seems to be the recurring theme, doesn't it? Trying to navigate politics with legal tools and ending up pleasing no one.
It really is. And then he did something similar, arguably even more explosive, just days before the election. October 28th, 2016, the letter to Congress.
Triggered by the Anthony Weiner laptop discovery. Weiner, the husband of Clinton aide Huma Abedin. What do they find there?
A massive number of emails.
Yeah.
Over 300,000. Many involved Abedin and Clinton, potentially some from early in her time as Secretary of State. It was clearly relevant to the email investigation they'd already closed.
And Comey felt he had to tell Congress, despite the DOJ rule against impacting elections.
He framed it as an ethical obligation. He testified the investigation was closed. Now there was new potential evidence. He felt keeping silent would be misleading Congress and the public. So he prioritized updating the record over the election neutrality policy.
But his own leadership at DOJ strongly disagreed.
Very strongly. Deputy AG Yates, others, warned him not to send the letter. They cited the long-standing practice, the risk of influencing the vote just days away.
And Comey's reaction?
He basically saw their opposition as just a recommendation, not a direct order. He later told the OIG he felt they were being cowardly by not giving him a clear yes or no, leaving him to take the heat alone.
So what did the Inspector General ultimately conclude about Comey's motives in both July and October? This seems key.
It is. The OIG concluded his decisions weren't based on department policy, but on ad hoc decision-making based on his personal views.
Making it up as he went along, essentially.
Kind of. And here's the really political part of the OIG's finding. They suggested his October decision, the letter, was probably influenced by a tacit assumption that Hillary Clinton was sure to be the next president.
Wait, really? He thought she'd win, so he sent the letter. How does that make sense?
The thinking, according to the OIG, was that he needed to protect the FBI's credibility with the incoming Clinton administration. If the Wiener laptop stuff came out after she won, and it looked like the FBI hid it, that would be catastrophic for the Bureau. So he acted to preempt that criticism, prioritizing the FBI's future reputation over election neutrality.
Wow. So he acted unconventionally to protect the FBI from future political attacks, but in doing so, created this massive current political firestorm and arguably influenced the election he thought was already decided.
That's the irony, isn't it? His attempt to manage political perception backfired spectacularly.
Okay, this is where things get really murky. Comey broke the rules, acted based on his own judgment, partly because he seemed to distrust the political leadership and maybe even his own institution's ability to handle things, but was the institution itself already deeply flawed?
That's the critical context. Because the internal problems at the FBI at the time gave so much ammunition to those later claims about a deep state conspiracy. Claims that absolutely feed into the political climate surrounding this 2025 indictment.
All right, listen, everyone. This is a really important point where policy failure and political attacks start to blur. The core info is now in your hands. Before we connect these dots, please pause this deep dive right now. Share your feelings about this case immediately in the comments. Thank you, the knowledgeable viewer of KaiZen. We really value your input. Okay, go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, we have to talk about the internal environment. The Strzok Page scandal is probably the biggest example.
Peter Strzok, Lisa Page, key FBI officials on both the Clinton email and the Russia investigations. Their text messages, they were pretty bad.
They were, frankly, terrible from a professional standpoint. Thousands of texts showing extreme bias against Trump. Strzok texting Page saying, "We'll stop him," referring to Trump, calling him an idiot. I mean, these aren't low-level agents. These are senior people running incredibly sensitive investigations.
So how did the OIG judge the impact of those texts? Did they find the bias actually change the outcomes of the investigations?
This is crucial. The OIG said the text showed extremely poor judgment and gross lack of professionalism. They cast a huge cloud over the FBI's credibility. However, and this is the key distinction, the OIG found no evidence that this bias directly changed specific investigative decisions in the mid-year case, like the decision not to prosecute Clinton in July 2016.
So the final legal call was sound, based on evidence, not bias.
According to the OIG, yes. The lack of evidence for criminal intent was the driver. But the perception bias was overwhelming, and other policy failures didn't help.
Like using personal email.
Yeah. The OIG confirmed Comey himself, plus Strzok and Page, used personal email, Gmail, Yahoo for some unclassified FBI business. That's a policy violation, plain and simple. It adds to that picture of rules not being followed, even at the top.
Which brings us back to that Wiener laptop, the delay in acting on it. You mentioned Strzok was involved there too.
Yes, and this delay really highlights a massive internal breakdown. Remember the timeline. The FBI knew about these 300,000-plus emails, including Clinton-related ones, by September 29, 2016.
But they did nothing for almost a month, until late October.
Nothing significant, not until the prosecutors in New York pushed them on October 21st. Nearly 3 weeks of inaction on potentially vital evidence right before the election.
Why the delay? What was Strzok's explanation?
Strzok said his focus had shifted entirely to the new Russia investigation. He figured the emails probably wouldn't change the Clinton outcome anyway, but given his anti-Trump texts,
The OIG didn't buy it.
they said they did not have confidence that his decision to basically shelve the Wiener laptop review while prioritizing the Russia probe was free from bias. It suggests bias might not have changed the final Clinton decision, but it sure looks like it affected the timing and urgency of investigating new evidence related to her.
And Comey himself seemed kind of out of the loop on this.
He testified he only vaguely remembered hearing about the laptop in early October. Said the information didn't index with him, partly because maybe he didn't realize Weiner was married to Huma Abedin. It points to a real disconnect, an institutional failure to recognize and act on critical information promptly.
So the FBI wasn't exactly a well-oiled, impartial machine when Comey sent that October letter.
Far from it. And other issues fueled the perception of conflicts of interest, too.
Like the McCabe situation, Andrew McCabe, the deputy director.
Right. His wife, Jill McCabe, ran for Virginia State Senate. She received over $675,000 in campaign funds from entities linked to Terry McAuliffe, a major Clinton ally. That was like 40% of her total funding.
The optics are just awful, even if McCabe followed ethics rules initially.
The appearance was terrible. Comey eventually had McCabe recuse himself from Clinton matters in November 2016, after the election and after the story became public, citing those appearance issues. But the damage was done. It fed directly into that swamp narrative.
And there was another official, Peter KaiZen.
Assistant AG Peter KaiZen, he got recused from Clinton matters too. He sent John Podesta, Clinton's campaign chair, a heads-up email about the timing of an FOIA release related to Clinton.
Was the information itself secret?
No, it was publicly available info. But the act of giving a heads-up to the campaign chair, especially when his son was apparently looking for a job with the campaign, leadership felt it showed poor judgment regarding appearances.
So you have bias, personal emails, delayed investigations, appearance issues, and then there were leaks.
A huge problem, according to the OIG. They found a pervasive culture of unauthorized media contacts at the FBI.
Yeah.
People leaking info constantly, plus a real fear of leaks paralyzing decision-making.
So the policy was clear, don't leak, but the culture was broken.
Completely broken. And that broken culture, that fear of leaks, was apparently part of Comey's calculation in October. He felt he had to get ahead of the story, announce the Weiner laptop discovery himself, because he feared someone else would leak it in a worse way.
So Comey's goal might have been transparency or protecting the institution, but the institution itself was already struggling with bias, conflicts, and leaks. It was compromised from within.
That's the inescapable conclusion. The rot, or at least the appearance of it, was already there. That context is vital for understanding everything that followed, including the indictment. Okay, this is where we pull it all together. For you, the knowledgeable learner, the absolute key skill here is being able to separate three things that constantly get mashed together in the political spin cycle: policy violations, poor judgment, and actual criminal intent.
They're not the same thing, are they? But they often get treated like they are.
Not at all the same. Let's apply this to the 2016 Meteor investigation first. Policy versus criminal intent.
What did the OIG find?
Okay, the OIG found zero evidence that political bias directly changed the main investigative decision, the decision not to prosecute Clinton in July 2016. Prosecutors stuck to the legal standard. Not enough proof of criminal intent. Legally, that core decision holds up.
Yeah.
But the OIG found tons of evidence of poor judgment and policy violations. Comey's solo press conferences using personal email, the huge delay on the Weiner laptop, the Strutzok page texts. These are serious failures. They demand accountability, maybe administrative action, maybe institutional reform. But they aren't necessarily crimes.
That's a critical distinction. Failing at your job or breaking internal rules isn't the same as committing a felony.
Exactly. Now, let's use that same lens on the current 2025 indictment against Comey.
What's the allegation there?
The indictment alleged specific criminal acts: lying to Congress, obstruction related to leaks. This is an accusation of criminal malice, of deliberate dishonesty under oath. That's a different category than the 2016 policy failures.
Okay, so legally, it's about proving that specific lie. But the context matters hugely here, right? The learner's tool, as you said.
Yeah. Absolutely. You have to ask, who brought this charge and when? We know former President Trump publicly called for Comey's prosecution for years. Then his former personal lawyer, Pam Bondi, gets put in charge of that specific office shortly before the indictment comes down.
So the timing and the personnel involved raise massive red flags about political motivation.
Undeniably, it means you have a specific legal charge, lying to Congress, but the whole situation surrounding it screams political pressure. So the fair question is this indictment focused on proving a genuine specific crime? Or is it basically using a potential lie as a pretext to punish Comey for all the political sins attributed to him from 2016.
If prosecutors can prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Comey knowingly lied in that 2020 testimony about leaks, then legally the charge could stand, regardless of the politics.
Legally, yes. A provable lie under oath is a crime. But the political context strongly suggests the motivation for digging deep to find and charge that specific crime might have been political retribution. It's incredibly hard to untangle.
This brings us back to that policy versus politics test. Comey himself admitted he acted outside the normal course in 2016.
Right. He said he feared the DOJ would screw around with the Clinton decision, that the world will catch on fire if he wouldn't step in. He saw himself as acting decisively to prevent chaos.
But the OIG saw that Comey doctrine as incredibly dangerous.
Very dangerous. They warned it creates a situation where everything becomes ad hoc, based on one person's gut feeling about politics instead of relying on established rules and processes. By trying to be politically savvy and independent, Comey ended up becoming maybe the most politicized FBI director ever.
It's like a tragedy, in a way. The institution, with its leaks and biases, was failing him. And then he failed the institution by going rogue, trusting his own judgment over the rules.
The whole system seemed to break down at the same time. Both the established procedures and the individual leadership buckled under the intense political pressure. That's the real takeaway from 2016.
So what we've uncovered here is incredibly complex. It's not a simple story. You've got clear policy failures, undeniable internal bias that damaged the FBI's reputation, all happening in this hyper-partisan environment that led Comey to believe breaking the rules was the only way to save the institution.
It's not about finding a simple hero or villain. It's about understanding that systemic breakdown. And for you, listening, the crucial skill is separating those layers. The policy mistakes, the bad judgment, the potential criminal act alleged now, and filtering out the political noise surrounding it all.
The FBI definitely earned the criticism it got in the OIG reports for those 2016 failures. But the question now is whether the political system is trying to turn those past errors, or maybe a specific later misstatement, into a criminal conviction driven by retribution.
That's the core tension.
Okay, you've heard the deep dive. You have the context, the details. We want your final verdict. Based on everything, if you believe Comey is essentially innocent of criminal wrongdoing and this indictment is mainly a political attack, tell us. Write Free E.
But if you believe he crossed lines, either with his actions in 2016 or potentially in his 2020 testimony, and that accountability, even criminal accountability, is warranted, then write LOCK. Let's see the final vote in the comments.
Let us know what you think.
And here's a final thought to leave you with. The OIG emphasized over and over how vital open and candid communication is between leaders at the DOJ and FBI.
But that completely broke down in 2016.
Utterly. Comey has plans from the Attorney General. Later, the AG and Deputy AG were apparently afraid to even talk directly to Comey because they thought he'd just push back hard.
When the Attorney General and the FBI Director can't even have an honest, direct conversation about a major national security investigation because of political tension?
What hope does the justice system have for real independence? When that fundamental trust at the very top collapses, the entire foundation of impartial law enforcement starts to crumble. That, perhaps, is the most damaging legacy of the whole Comey affair.
Welcome to The Critique. So today we're looking at excerpts from that really extensive DOJ Inspector General's review covering the FBI and DOJ's actions around the 2016 election.
Right, and we need to jump right in. The material itself, it's incredibly detailed. The documentation is there, but structurally, it struggles a bit.
Okay.
The goal here is really to take these, powerful findings from the OIG and just reorganize them, make the narrative hit harder for the reader.
Okay, yeah. And one thing that seems clear, running through it all, is that even though the OIG didn't find political bias drove specific decisions,
Right.
they definitely found, well, frankly, a shocking lack of professionalism and some really poor judgment from key people.
Exactly. And that takes us straight to our first big point, thinking about completeness and focus. Here it is. The sequencing of the OIG's findings on professionalism and judgment obscures the immediate connection between personal conduct and investigative decisions.
Right, I think I see where you're headed. Let's look at that structural weakness more closely.
Okay, so the report, it often isolates the really damaging stuff, the political texts, the media leaks, using personal email for work.
All that.
All that gets pushed into separate chapters, often like chapter 12, way at the back. And this is after the earlier chapters have already concluded that no, political bias didn't actually drive the specific decisions being examined.
Details on the gross lack of professionalism, as the OIG put it.
Yes.
That timing, that delay, it feels like it waters down how serious those failures actually were. It sort of lessens the impact of that cloud they talked about hanging over everything.
It absolutely does. I mean, the OIG itself points out that finding, that Strzok page text from August 2016, you know the one, the "We'll Stop Trump" text.
Yeah, infamous.
That text made the OIG go back and question Strzok's earlier decisions in the mid-year investigation. But that crucial piece of context, the thing that explains why everyone was so concerned in the first place, it's structurally separated from the analysis of those very decisions.
Okay, but hold on. If we move that evidence, the poor judgment stuff, the cloud, if we put it earlier like you're suggesting, isn't there a risk we kind of mislead the reader, make them think the OIG did find bias was the driver, when their final conclusion was it wasn't for those specific calls? We have to respect that finding.
That's a really fair point, a critical distinction. The suggestion isn't about changing the OIG's conclusion at all. It's about making the narrative stronger, but showing the link between the conduct and the need for scrutiny.
Okay.
We need to show the reader why this conduct raised such legitimate, urgent questions right from the start. So the idea is to strategically place that key evidence of poor judgment closer to where you discuss the decisions those individuals were making.
Got it. So you establish the reason for the intense scrutiny up front. It actually builds confidence in the OIG's thoroughness, maybe.
Precisely. It's not changing the finding, it's changing how the reader understands the context surrounding that finding.
Okay, that makes sense. So concretely, how would that look? Give us an example or two.
Sure. So like when the text introduces Peter Strzok's role in, say, Chapter 5, discussing the mid-year review,
Okay.
it shouldn't wait until Chapter 12 to bring up the fact that he used his personal email to forward info about the draft search warrant for the Wiener laptop.
Wow, yeah.
And that info seems to have been under seal. That's a huge lapse in judgment with high risk. That needs to be right there, up front, as context for his involvement.
Immediately.
Immediately. And similarly, all those mentions of unauthorized media contacts, they're kind of scattered. Consolidate them. Draw directly on the OIG's own finding that this whole culture influenced FBI officials who were advising Comey on consequential investigative decisions in October 2016. Link the bad behavior directly to the actions being analyzed.
Okay, so that's a pretty significant restructuring. You're basically front-loading the evidence of poor judgment. It really frames it less as isolated incidents and more like, well, like individual conduct that created this massive systemic mess.
It did. Building on that, the systemic side, how did this lack of professionalism feed into maybe the biggest operational failure they documented, that whole delay with the Weir laptop? That's a perfect segue, because that structural, organizational failure is absolutely the next critical area. So, our second critique, this one focused on structure and flow, is the report's explicit failure to find a single consistent explanation for the month-long delay in reviewing the critical Wiener laptop emails creates an organizational ambiguity that demands sharper narrative focus.
Yeah, the OIG's actual finding on that delay, what was it, between September 29th and October 26th? It's pretty staggering when you read it.
It is.
They literally say they did not identify a consistent or persuasive explanation for why nobody acted, even though, as they point out, basically all the facts needed for the search warrant were already known way back at the beginning of that period.
Right. And yet the way the material currently presents it, it doesn't frame that inconsistency, that lack of explanation, as the core management failure it clearly was.
How does it frame it now?
Well, it gives you this sort of laundry list of competing, almost non-committal factors. You know, oh, they were focused on the Russia investigation, or there were delays in the New York office, or legal issues.
Right, like a series of unfortunate, disconnected events.
Exactly. It makes the whole massive failure sound like just stuff happening. Random accidents.
Which kind of lets leadership off the hook, doesn't it? It presents these competing stories instead of saying, hey, leadership failed to cut through the conflict and make a decision. That's a failure to prioritize, not just, slow email.
Precisely. It's a classic executive-level paralysis when faced with competing, high-stakes priorities. You see it in big organizations.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So the suggestion for improvement here is really crucial. Instead of just listing those competing reasons, the critique needs to zero in on that documented conflict in executive priorities and the management paralysis that resulted. Frame the inconsistency itself, the lack of a clear story, as the central, high-level management failure.
Okay, so the delay wasn't a bug, it was a feature of the system breaking down.
A feature of the system breaking down under pressure, exactly. A failure of clear direction.
We need to see that breakdown, that executive tension, more clearly then.
Right. The concrete examples have to really heighten that tension, that inconsistency. For instance, show the stark contrast. You have FBI headquarters reacting immediately in late September. McCabe tells pre-stab, get a team to New York right away. And then crickets. The mid-year team does basically nothing for weeks, and you contrast that initial urgency with Strzok's later testimony trying to rationalize it, saying his focus shifted to Russia, and anyway, he would have been shocked if the emails changed anything.
Which is irrelevant to getting the warrant and looking.
Totally irrelevant to the procedural necessity. And then you highlight McCabe's reaction on October 27th, suddenly saying the situation was absolutely urgent.
A reaction that should have happened 4 weeks earlier.
4 weeks earlier. That gap, that 30-day failure to prioritize and follow through, that's the core management problem here. And that needs to be the structural heart of this section, not just the list of excuses.
Okay, got it. So we shift the focus. It's not analyzing a bunch of low-level process issues. It's delivering a clear verdict on a systemic failure. Management paralysis led directly to that 30-day crisis. That is a much stronger narrative.
It is. Now let's connect these internal problems, the individual judgment lapses, the systemic paralysis, to why this OIG document still matters so much, today.
Okay. So that brings us to the third critique. This one's about significance and relevance, right? Connecting the dots to current events.
Exactly. And the key recommendation is this. The material should emphasize the long-term, tangible gravity of policy and judgment failures by connecting them to recent legal developments involving key figures.
Right. When the OIG report first came out, its mandate was narrow, right? Did bias affect the 2016 decisions? Yes or no?
Pretty much.
So things like leaking sensitive information, or using personal email for classified adjacent work, they often got framed kind of softly. Matters of poor judgment or policy inconsistency.
Yeah, bureaucratic language.
But the weakness in the material now is that it still leans on that historical, somewhat soft framing.
And that just doesn't cut it anymore.
It really understates the severity, especially given everything that's happened since. The political climate, the legal scrutiny surrounding the DOJ, it's intense. And that old focus feels dated now, especially because we have this huge piece of external context. The recent indictment of former Director Comey, charged September 25th, 2025, right? Lying to Congress about leaks, other things.
Exactly. What the OIG might have called policy breaches back then look very different now. They look like precursors, like high-risk behaviors that ultimately led to severe legal trouble.
That's the connection we need to make explicitly.
That's the bridge. So, the suggestion is, take the OIG's detailed findings, Comey peeping and sharing those memos about Trump talks using his personal Gmail for work, and reframe them. These weren't just minor rule bending. They were high-risk actions that arguably have now contributed to serious legal consequences and, frankly, fueled accusations about the political weaponization of the Justice Department.
Okay, but wait. If the OIG itself didn't refer those specific actions, like the Gmail use for criminal prosecution back then, how do we justify linking them so directly to a recent indictment? Are we overstepping?
Good question. We justify it by focusing on the pattern of high-risk behavior and the nature of their decision-making style, that ad hoc, personalized approach that bypassed normal procedures. The actions themselves showed a disregard for established rules and risks.
Okay, so focus on the risk profile.
Exactly. We show this concretely. You specifically cross-reference the OIG finding about Comey's Gmail use and also Strzok forwarding that under-seal draft warrant to his personal account. You note the OIG did refer these for internal review, highlighting the policy breach was recognized.
And then connect that pattern of bypassing policy to the bigger consequences?
Yes, you highlight the OIG's finding
that Comey's whole reason for making that unilateral July 5th announcement.
The Clinton email announcement.
Right. It stemmed from his concern about corrosive doubt surrounding A.G. Lynch, especially after that tarmac meeting. This is a prime example of high-stakes, politically motivated, ad hoc decision-making, overriding clear, long-standing DOJ policy against discussing uncharged conduct publicly.
Okay.
These weren't just abstract policy debates. These judgment calls had direct, catastrophic political consequences that we are still dealing with today.
That reframing feels essential. It takes the OIG report from being just a historical look at 2016
Right.
and turns it into a living document, an analysis of how bending rules and exercising poor judgment, even if not criminally charged at the time, can erode institutions and lead to these huge long-term crises.
It shows the reader these weren't just, footnotes in a report. These documented failures were fundamental missteps. They set the stage for years of turmoil that followed.
Okay, wow. This has been a really deep dive into restructuring this. So just to recap the three main strategic takeaways for the listener revising this piece. First, improve that narrative flow. Put the damaging conduct, the gross lack of professionalism, right before you analyze the decisions it casts doubt on.
Right. Context first. Second, nail down that systemic management failure behind the Wiener laptop delay. Ditch the list of excuses and frame the inconsistency and the month-long paralysis as a central failure of executive leadership prioritization and follow-up.
Make the inconsistency the story. And finally, amp up the relevance for today. Explicitly connect those past policy violations and judgment errors to the current, very real legal and political fallout. Make sure the reader gets the full, ongoing weight of what the OIG actually found.
Absolutely. The strength of the original work, the submitted material, is definitely in the detailed evidence it pulls from the OIG report. That's solid. Applying these strategic structural shifts will turn that evidence into a much more powerful, relevant narrative for any reader today.
So we really encourage you to take these organizational strategies, implement them, and then feel free to submit the revised work back to us. We'd be happy to take another look. Keep refining that analysis.
Welcome to the debate. The federal indictment of former FBI Director James Comey, filed back in September 2025, has really sent shockwaves through the political and legal landscape. I mean, this isn't just another indictment, right? It is a profound challenge to the very notion of an independent Justice Department. So the fundamental question we have to confront today is this. Does this criminal prosecution of James Comey represent, a justifiable, maybe complex, but justifiable effort to enforce genuine accountability for breaches of conduct? Or does the evidence surrounding the whole process overwhelmingly point to a politically motivated hit job targeting a perceived adversary?
Well, that framing, while certainly urgent, it risks minimizing the actual substance of the charges, I think. I commit this from a slightly different perspective. While the political environment is, yes, undeniably toxic, we simply cannot ignore the long and frankly well-documented history of Comey's policy violations and institutional defiance. This indictment, which seems supported by a pattern of behavior thoroughly investigated by the Department of Justice Inspector General, represents a necessary and maybe even overdue attempt to hold even the most powerful officials accountable when they choose to disregard established legal frameworks.
See, I disagree fundamentally on the priority there. We absolutely must focus on the context of the indictment itself. The timing of this prosecution cannot, under any rigorous analysis, be separated from the intensely political environment and the explicit demands from the executive branch. I mean, the president has publicly and repeatedly called for the prosecution of perceived foes, referring to Comey as a dirty cop and corrupt James Comey. The ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, has already publicly described this indictment as a, quote, grotesque abuse of presidential power, arguing the administration has corrupted the legal system just to fulfill a campaign of retribution. And look at the process itself. The indictment follows the president's impatient and frankly extraordinarily direct social media posts urging the Department of Justice to, move forward immediately. And crucially, the Attorney General prosecuting this case, Pam Bondi, is one of the president's former personal attorneys. I mean, when the prosecutor is installed specifically after the previous top official was forced out and the charges follow a direct presidential command, well, the true motivation really appears to be political vengeance, not the pursuit of justice.
Okay. The skepticism regarding the political optics is understandable, I grant you that. But we have to maintain focus on the principle that no one is above the law. And this principle, it has to apply equally, right, to political friends and foes. When we look back, the issue isn't just about the current political climate, it's about Comey's history of prioritizing his personal judgment over the DOJ's institutional integrity. The evidence for this is substantial. The DOJ Inspector General, the OIG for short, thoroughly documented Comey's history of ad hoc decision-making based on his personal views. And this repeatedly rejected long-standing department policy. Just consider the public statements he made regarding the Clinton email investigation. The July 5, 2016 announcement that criticized her conduct while simultaneously recommending no charges, and then the October 28, 2016 letter to Congress right before the election. Both actions were flagrant violations of department protocol regarding commenting on pending investigations and announcing charging recommendations. And furthermore, the OIG also found that Comey violated FBI policy by retaining and leaking his unclassified memos of conversations with the president, an action Comey himself admitted was intended to prompt the appointment of a special counsel. So the current charges centered on false statements about authorizing leaks and testimony about classified information. They suggest accountability is finally catching up to a pattern of institutional disregard that began years ago.
Okay, but I challenge the idea that these past policy errors, however serious, provide a legitimate foundation for this current criminal prosecution. Let's dig into that OIG finding on ad hoc decision-making. The reports clearly show Comey felt compelled to act outside of norms because he believed, rightly or wrongly, in an overriding public interest for transparency. He was facing an unprecedented political situation and worried, as he put it, about the world catching on fire if the DOJ handled the Clinton matter entirely in private. Now, while his execution was flawed, perhaps deeply flawed by poor coordination, those past missteps were policy and ethical errors driven by a subjective, albeit maybe misguided, belief in the necessity of maintaining public trust. This current indictment in 2025 is fundamentally different. It is clearly, I would argue, tainted by explicit presidential command, and it's focused on these very contested allegations of lying in 2020 testimony about authorizing leaks regarding classified information. The fact that this specific process was rushed and politicized, using a replacement prosecutor who was a former personal attorney to the president, well, that suggests the true motivation is not the rigorous application of the rule of law to correct past policy missteps. It feels like political vengeance disguised as jurisprudence. The timing and the actors involved, for me, invalidate any claim of neutrality here.
Right, and I think the core of our disagreement really lies in whether that explicit presidential rhetoric can somehow be used as a shield against a legitimate investigation into potential criminal conduct. When the OIG reviewed Comey's 2016 actions, they highlighted serious breaches long before the current administration even took office. I mean, Comey himself admitted he made a conscious decision not to tell department leadership about his plan to make the July 5th statement. He testified that he intentionally restricted the time available for department leaders to respond precisely because he believed they would instruct him not to speak publicly. He even viewed the resulting lack of direct engagement from DOJ leadership as them, quote, taking kind of a cowardly way out. Now, that wasn't really a transparency decision. That sounds more like institutional insubordination. So doesn't this indictment merely represent the eventual consequence, perhaps, of an FBI director who repeatedly believed his personal ethical compass superseded the department's own rules? The current charges concerning lying about classified information and leaks seem directly related to the chaos created by that initial pattern of self-exemption. If you constantly ignore institutional rules, you inevitably open yourself up to severe legal scrutiny down the line. Wouldn't you say?
Well, I must fundamentally disagree on the conclusion that this pattern justifies this current prosecution under these circumstances. Let's broaden the lens for a moment to the entire internal culture the OIG exposed.
That OIG report was damning, finding that many FBI personnel demonstrated, quote, extremely poor judgment and a gross lack of professionalism. They cited those politically charged texts between high-level agents like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, and acknowledged that FBI media policy was, quote, widely ignored throughout the entire organization. So if the goal is genuinely to clean up the institution, to drain the deep state or the swamp, as the president's supporters like to claim, why is the sole major criminal focus on James Comey?
Doesn't the highly selective pursuit of only the director, while apparently ignoring these widespread cultural issues acknowledged in the OIG report, doesn't that prove that this is a targeted top-down political action rather than a comprehensive effort to enforce professionalism across the board? It looks an awful lot like singling out the highest-profile political adversary for maximum public effect.
I see the point about selectivity. But acknowledging a badder cultural problem within the FBI, the unauthorized media contacts, the use of personal devices, that does not, and I believe should not, nullify the need to hold the director accountable for his own, arguably egregious breaches. Accountability really has to start at the very top. The OIG specifically noted that Comey's decision set a potentially dangerous precedent for the FBI by encouraging a culture of individual defiance. And moreover, the current criminal charges, they relate specifically to his sworn testimony regarding classified information and authorizing leaks. This stems directly, it seems, from the OIG finding that Comey himself violated policy by retaining and leaking his own memos, specifically to spur a special counsel. So his initial policy breaches provided the fertile ground for these subsequent criminal allegations. We simply cannot excuse an FBI director who believes he is above the rules, regardless of his stated intentions, because that kind of institutional defiance, well, it eventually metastasizes into precisely the kind of legal trouble we are seeing now.
Okay, let's maybe shift to the standard of accountability, because this is a critical legal distinction often missed in all the political noise. Consider the high standard Comey himself set for others. He publicly criticized Hillary Clinton's handling of classified information as extremely careless. Now, remember that the mid-year prosecutors, that was the team investigating the Clinton email server, they determined that the relevant statutory term, grossly negligent, required a state of mind just a little short of being willful or criminally reckless. Comey intentionally deviated from that statutory language in his public statement, essentially lowering the public standard for critique while carefully sidestepping the actual legal standard required for prosecution. So, in light of his own subsequent documented breaches, using personal email for FBI business, retaining and leaking memos, why should the public or the legal system grant Comey sort of intellectual charity regarding his own policy compliance now? I actually agree with you that the tension between the standard Comey applied to others and the latitude he took for himself is, well, it's glaring. But my key concern remains. That tension doesn't automatically transform his later contested actions into criminal conduct worthy of this kind of unprecedented prosecution, orchestrated, it seems, by the executive's political allies.
That is a compelling analysis of the standard, yes, and it certainly highlights Comey's apparent hypocrisy, which definitely matters to the public's perception of his credibility. But let me challenge your conclusion there. The question isn't just whether Comey was careless or hypocritical. The question before the court now is whether the current charges, making false statements, unauthorized disclosure potentially, are supported by evidence that meets the criminal threshold. The investigation is alleging that Comey lied under oath, which is a specific, high-level criminal offense. So while the politics are, yes, ugly, if the evidence demonstrates deliberate false statements regarding sensitive information, then arguably the prosecution is justified, regardless of who occupies the White House. If we start dismissing every prosecution involving a political figure as purely a hit job, simply because the president voiced an opinion, well, we effectively grant immunity to all high-level officials whenever the political environment gets polarized. And that, I think, would erode the rule of law far more dangerously than even a potentially politically motivated inquiry.
I have to disagree entirely on that immunity point. The core issue here is the weaponization of the Justice Department, not necessarily the ultimate guilt or innocence of the defendant on these specific charges. Whether Comey was, guilty of being a dirty cop, as the president claims, or merely committed severe policy errors years ago, The ultimate issue here is the legitimacy of this prosecution's origin and execution. The fact that a sitting president, who openly declared him a destroyer of lives, explicitly pressured his appointed attorney general, who happens to be a former personal lawyer, to move now to prosecute, well, that indicates that this indictment serves primarily as a political tool designed to punish a high-profile adversary. When the Justice Department's prosecutorial decisions appear openly dictated by a campaign of presidential retribution, the integrity of the entire process is lost. And that renders the result, however factually accurate the underlying claim might turn out to be, fundamentally compromised in my view.
And that is where we diverge most sharply, I suppose. I see the political orchestration as perhaps unfortunate window dressing, but I still see a body of documented misconduct that provides a necessary legal basis, or at least a plausible one, for these charges. Comey, it seems, believed he was the exception to the rule, and the charges relating to subsequent lying about leaks appear to be a direct result of that initial institutional defiance. So to dismiss this as purely political risks overlooking the substantive need to establish that even the leaders of law enforcement must follow the law and adhere to protocols, particularly regarding classified information and sworn testimony.
All right, so to summarize my position, the indictment, yes, it's factually rooted in a contested allegation about lying under oath concerning leaks, but its true significance, I believe, lies entirely in the political theater surrounding it. You have the clear and documented presidential pressure, the rapid replacement of career prosecutors with political allies, and the immediate, almost celebratory declaration of justice in America. These elements raise profound, almost existential concerns about whether the rule of law is being applied fairly or if it's being deployed as a political weapon to silence perceived enemies.
And from my perspective, while the political context is certainly unavoidable and absolutely demands scrutiny, the indictment cannot simply be dismissed as just a cynical hit job. Comey's documented self-serving decisions back in 2016 were already criticized by the OIG for prioritizing personal judgment over institutional policy. That created a foundation of misconduct that led, arguably directly, to his subsequent issues with classified materials and testimony. So this case forces us to confront the very severe question of whether a high-ranking official's consistent pattern of non-compliant conduct warrants criminal consequences, regardless of who happens to be in power at the moment.
So we have presented what we believe are the strongest arguments regarding the James Comey indictment, digging into both the legal precedents and the undeniable political context. We encourage you, our perceptive listeners, to review the evidence we've discussed today and formulate your own informed conclusion.
Does the documented evidence, the history, support the conclusion that this is a necessary pursuit of accountability, a required check on an official who perhaps believed he was above the rules?
Or is the overwhelming political context, the pressure, the timing, proof that this is actually a clear case of political retribution? The justice system weaponized against a perceived enemy.
We really want to know what you think. If you believe Comey is ultimately guilty and should face consequences for his alleged crimes, based on the evidence presented in the indictment, write "lock" in the comments below.
And if you believe he is innocent of these specific charges, perhaps because the political manipulation of the justice system taints the entire process, write "free."
Yeah, take a moment right now. You can pause the show and share your feelings, your analysis in the comments.
Absolutely. There is much more to explore in these foundational issues of government transparency and institutional integrity, and we really thank you for engaging with the debate.